What's up, guys? Welcome back to Career Jumpstart. So I'm obviously not Nick. I'm Jason. I usually do the technical series, but we do have a special guest today. Super excited. So it's my good friend, Elle McFarlane. She's going to be talking a little bit about her recruiting experience and things like that. So Elle, how you doing? How's graduated life?
I'm good. Graduated life is good. It's nice to have like a little bit of a break before I start full time. So I'm enjoying that despite the very cold weather currently.
For sure. Cool. So let's get into it. So could you just give like a little, like really quick background on yourself, like what you studied at IU, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I studied neuroscience and computer science. So I'm a double major at IU. And yeah, I specialized in AI within CS too.
Right. And you graduated this past December, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And do you mind sharing where you're going full time? I heard it's like a sort of like bird related company, like ornithology or something like that.
Yeah, it's like this small company. It's not very popular, so probably most of the people watching haven't heard of it. It's for Twitter, yeah, and it'll be the CI infrastructure team for them.
Sweet. So my first question for you is you're doing neuroscience and CS, which is like still pretty insane. Like they're two very difficult fields, but they're like pretty different. So what was the reason for combining the two? And did the neuroscience part ever come up when you were doing your software recruiting?
Yeah, so they are different, but in the way that they're similar is that, again, since I specialized in AI within CS, there is a little bit of crossover between artificial intelligence and neuroscience. So my original idea was to combine them and eventually get a PhD in AI. And my thinking was basically that hopefully my neuroscience background could come into play and allow me to solve some kind of issue in AI down the line, because I think probably what we'll find out later on is that some of the issues that are in AI, like generalizability, for example, probably a solution to that will come from a neuroscience discovery along the way. So that was my original idea. And then basically through getting more industry experience, I decided that I liked the sort of traditional software engineering aspect a tiny bit more than the like research aspect, which is more of that machine learning kind of development. So, but I like traditional a little bit more. So I swayed away from that.
For sure. Are there any plans like in the works right now to go to grad school, or is that something that's just still a little down the line?
Yeah, I would say it's too far down the line to tell. So for now, I've committed to industry basically.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, let me know when you drop your first research paper. I'm sure it'll be a smash hit.
Be sure to share.
So another question I had for you was, obviously we're in the throes of COVID, and it's definitely affected a lot of stuff. It's made recruiting definitely pretty tough, but you obviously landed a really stellar offer at a really great company. So, high level, what was your general strategy going into full-time recruiting in this current world state?
Right. So I would say the strategy that I used perhaps is not recommendable, especially given the pandemic, because I'm sure that like a lot of times people say the strategy for our industry is apply. So like it's a numbers game, right? And I wasn't really following that strategy in the beginning. And if my original strategy didn't work, that's what I was going to do. But the strategy that I had was basically to only apply to companies that genuinely interested me a lot. But I wouldn't say that that's explicitly a strategy. It is in the sense that probably because I was more passionate about them, I would be able to do better in interviews in terms of showing that passion. But I would say a more explicit strategy would be to use all of the career websites that you can, because sometimes job opportunities don't show up on all of those websites. So for example, I was on AngelList, which actually is more so for startups, just FYI. But I was interested in working for startups too. So yeah, I was on there. I can't remember, maybe Glassdoor. So it's kind of just using multiple resources to see all the opportunities that you can and look through and find companies that interest you.
Gotcha. So Twitter is a really unique company in my opinion, because number one, it's like they really only have like a couple products, right? They really only have their social media platform. They have like MoPub, a couple other things, and they're also like a lot smaller than the other like big tech companies, right? Compared to Google, Amazon, things like that. What are some other features about Twitter specifically that you were interested in and ended up having you apply to that company?
Yeah, sure. So one of I'm forgetting which founder, but one of the founders said something once which basically summarized why I love Twitter so much.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that it's not really even a social network, it's an informational network. And like, you know me, I'm such a nerd and like I love learning. So I actually use Twitter to learn because that's like my informational hub. And like I even like I follow specialists in the AI field, for example, and they tweet their research publications and like little summaries. And there's just like the dialogue around research papers, for example, on Twitter is so unique because I don't even know where else I would get that kind of I guess commentary on research papers like that, aside from being in a lab like I used to be. So it's nice. I basically use it for learning, and I respect that so much as a product. So that's why I was really interested in working for them.
For sure. Who are like some of your favorite Twitter pages to follow right now, off the top of your head, if you have any?
Well, I would say like account wise, I like Melanie Mitchell a lot. She actually visited IU and gave a speech about some of the major problems that we're having in AI. And then after I listened to her, I like bought her book and stuff. And I, I became a fan, I guess. And then in her book, she mentions other books, which allowed me to find other books. So I like her a lot, I would say.
Gotcha. So I also was recruiting Twitter. Obviously, things didn't work out as well for me. But I mean, just in general, that point aside, Twitter is notorious for having a really difficult process, right? With these smaller tech companies, they're able to be more selective. Their online assessments are notoriously hard. So going in, knowing that, what was your strategy for preparation? Yeah,
so LeetCode, like always, as most people know. I would say also I reviewed like major, like I went back and I mean, I of course reviewed like binary search kind of stuff, and just like the fundamentals of what we would learn in data structures and algorithms, for example. So I wasn't necessarily doing problems in those categories. I was going over like high level concepts and reviewing those kind of things just in case they happen to ask those, like in case they asked questions conceptually about those things. And then I also I bought what is it called? Just like the premium LeetCode thing for a month, just so that I could use the mock interview part of it. Are you aware of that feature?
Yeah.
So I use that because I think sometimes when we like use LeetCode as a prep tool, we probably, even if we don't realize it, we're kind of filtering for questions that we kind of want to use to practice, which isn't good because you can't do that in an interview, obviously. So I use the mock interview tool, which gotcha. I thought was helpful.
So speaking of filtering and like topics in general, like was there stuff that when you started preparing, you were like, dang, I haven't looked at that since 343 or 403. Like, was it like Dijkstra's or was it like, priority queues, heaps, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Precisely what you just said, for example. Yeah, because like I did go over Dijkstra's. And I was also trying to, I don't know why I did this because it's not necessarily something that they'll ask you for, but I was trying to, when I was reviewing data structures and algorithms, I was making sure that I could explain them in some sort of like analytic, I was making sure I could explain them to someone that wasn't in tech, for example, as a check to make sure that I actually did understand them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a really good practice. And I think being able to boil down a complex idea into something that's pretty simple, it demonstrates true understanding, right? Because you know exactly what you need to leave out and what you need to leave in, right? I think,
exactly.
Yeah, so something that I also think is important in preparation is talking through stuff. So part of what you were saying, like the importance between mock interviewing and just doing the stuff on your own is whenever you're coding with somebody in an interview, one of the most important things is talking through your solution, right? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why is this important? And what's going to be your overall algorithm to solve this problem, right? A lot of kids will just like start coding and then the guy on the other end is just like,
whoa.
Yeah, like, okay, like what's going on here, buddy? Like what's happening?
Right. Exactly.
So mock interviewing is definitely going to help with that. And I mean, if you're, I talk to myself a lot. I don't have other friends that are like willing to hear me out. So I'll talk to myself a lot. But yeah, I think the mock interview tool at Luddy is something that I also encourage a lot of you guys to utilize, because me, Jared, and Connor, we're kind of there for you to practice explaining your solutions. And I think it's it's like very, very low stake stuff when you're mock interviewing with us. So then when you do get to the final round at Twitter, Google, Amazon, wherever, you're, not kind of being thrown into the deep end there.
Right, exactly. And I think I probably should have mentioned that I used you guys a lot for my prep for interviewing. So it was nice because I didn't just do a technical mock interview. I also went over behavioral kind of stuff, which I think the behavioral aspect kind of gets not neglected, but especially for technical interviews, we don't emphasize it enough. And I think it probably has more weight than we think. Because at the end of the day, they still want to hire someone that they would want to work with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So were you practicing stuff like, tell me about a time where you had to lead a team, or was it just more general stuff?
Yeah. So I actually, after I did I worked with one of you guys on like general behavior stuff and like asking like, does this kind of make sense for the answer that I have prepped so far? I think I Googled like top 40 behavioral questions, and I copied them and I pasted them in a file, and then I tried to succinctly with bullet points answer them. Yeah. And that way, one, it helps in getting concise answers, but also it's when you have it written, you can go back like right before your interview and kind of review them so that they're fresh in your head.
Yeah. Did you ever talk through them out loud to yourself?
Yes. I think right before my interview, I was like, what are some big ones that they'll probably ask? And so this isn't necessarily a behavioral question, but they do tend to be like, tell me about yourself. Not directly, but in some way or another, you're going to end up having to give some kind of rundown about yourself. So I practiced that one just because, as you're noticing now, sometimes I ramble and I didn't want to completely ramble the whole time. So yeah. And also, again, it's just like kind of practice how you play sort of thing. So if you're only reading it, it makes sense to make sure that you can kind of somewhat smoothly also say your answers.
Gotcha. So one thing I'm really curious about is you're doing CI, you're working on the CI team for Twitter, right? So can you briefly describe like what that is and what you'll be doing?
Yeah, sure. So CI, a lot of times when people say CI, they really mean CI/CD. So it stands for continuous integration, continuous development. And the whole philosophy behind it is essentially whenever, teams are working towards a common software base, right? And every time someone makes a change, you want to make sure, like, because we all know this, we think we make a tiny change and that it won't have that big of an impact, and then we compile it and it doesn't compile and we're like, what the heck? So and that happens just with ourselves writing our own code. And so that problem is even worse when you have a bunch of teams or people working towards the same thing. And so the idea is that no matter how small of a change you make, you want to make sure that it doesn't break the code. And so the idea is that you make your change, you commit it, and then it starts this automatic pipeline. So we'll automatically create the build, make sure that it doesn't break the build or anything, and then we'll keep going down the pipeline successively, and then eventually it will actually deploy. So that's the CD part of it. And so I will basically be working on tools for Twitter that contribute to that CI/CD process, because again, it's automated. So automation equals software. So
right.
Yeah.
So I know you were doing something kind of similar this past summer with your internship. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about how you were able to leverage all the experience you got from that into your process with Twitter?
Mm-hmm. I think so. There was sort of like an indirect leveraging in the sense that Twitter's application was a general software application. And so then I later got the email like the CI infra team is interested in you. And I think the reason probably that my application stood out was because I had worked on a CI pipeline for my previous company this past summer, and probably not a lot of people have experience with that. So that's like an indirect way that I was able to leverage it, I would say. And then also I'm also going to be working with some cloud tools for Twitter, and that's a lot of what I was doing this past summer as well. So I would say in that sense, I was leveraging it. And then also during the actual interviews, I was able to, when I was doing those kind of I mean, they don't directly say this, but when I was given opportunities to talk about certain experiences, I was able to use things that I had learned in my job last year.
Gotcha. Sweet. That all sounds really good, and I definitely don't want this to go too long because I know you're pretty busy with your moving and whatnot to New York. But any other last minute advice for kids wanting to recruit for like big end tech out of IU, right? Like I know not a lot of companies really come to our career fair, but I think people like you and there are quite a few other students that have made it work for sure. So what was any last minute guidance or tips for these kids?
I would say, this is going to sound cheesy, but try to have fun in your interviews. And so maybe another way of saying that is don't be afraid to laugh and like kind of be yourself. So like, just don't take yourself too seriously, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because they also want to see more or less how you are as a person. Because again, it reflects back on like, how is this person actually going to be when I'm working with them? And I think it also helps with nerves in the sense that, again, at least for me, if I take myself too seriously, then it makes me more nervous for some reason. So that would be one. And then I would also say it kind of goes back to what you were saying about verbalizing your thought process during interviews, but you really should, if anything that you're thinking pertains to how you're going about the problem, say it, which means that you should be talking most of the time during your technical interviews. So even if you're doing something that's like considered I think my headphones just died. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe they didn't quite die. Okay. So yeah. So even if you're doing something that's not a great practice, say it. Say I wouldn't normally do this, but for time purposes, I'm gonna make this variable like SX, even though it's not clear what that means. Like, so just like verbalize it, even if to emphasize the fact that that it's not the best way to go about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of doubling down on that, right? Like, I think having recruited for finance and investment banking, which is super strict, you can smile, but only if it helps the client sort of thing. I think software companies are really big on culture because human capital is the most valuable asset in this space, right? A company's product is only as good as those who build it. And so they're willing to do whatever they can to keep you on board. And part of that is really fostering and growing a culture of, hey, we really only care about your product. So, if you're a goofy guy and you wear t-shirts and stuff like that, as long as the product is good, that's what matters, right? And I think
exactly
that's a stark difference from tech versus businesses. It's very like ends justify the means, and like a more casual, right? Like business might be ends justify the means in terms of like, yeah, like we'll sacrifice our entry-level employees working 90 hours a week if it leads to deal close, and then tech companies are a little bit more lenient than that. But yeah, I think that's really great advice. And I think helping with nerves is, if anything else, is the best result of just being more casual and lighthearted in your interviews.
Exactly.
Cool. So I know your headphones are dying and I don't want to keep you too long, but thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me right before you head off to start your new life at Twitter.
Thanks for having me.
Career Jumpstart, guys. Join us next week where we help you jumpstart your career in tech. Thanks, Elle.
Bye.